There was a road in northern Vermont that did not appear on most maps. It began as an ordinary country lane, leaving the highway beside an old wooden sign and winding between fields of tall summer grass. For the first few miles, there was nothing unusual about it. There were white farmhouses set far back from the road, red barns warmed by the late afternoon sun, and narrow stone walls half hidden beneath ferns. But farther north, beyond the last mailbox and the final stretch of telephone wire, the pavement ended. The road became a path of pale gravel. Then the gravel became packed earth. And after another mile, the earth road entered a forest of pine and maple trees so tall that their branches met overhead, forming a green and shadowed ceiling. Very few people travelled beyond that point. Those who did sometimes spoke of a quiet valley somewhere on the other side of the forest. They said a river moved through the valley, clear enough to reveal every smooth stone beneath its surface. They said wildflowers grew there long after the flowers in nearby towns had faded. And they said that when the evening wind passed through the grass, the whole valley seemed to breathe. Most people believed it was only a local story. A pleasant story, certainly, but nothing more. Elias Mercer had heard the story many years earlier from his grandfather. When Elias was a child, his grandfather had owned a small repair shop near the shore of Lake Champlain. The shop smelled of cedar shavings, machine oil, old leather, and the faint sweetness of pipe tobacco, although his grandfather had stopped smoking long before Elias was born. People brought all kinds of things to that shop. Clocks that no longer kept time, wooden chairs with broken legs, music boxes that had forgotten their songs, fishing reels rusted by lake water, and sometimes objects so old that no one remembered exactly what they had once been used for. Elias loved spending afternoons there. He would sit on a high stool near the window while his grandfather worked beneath a hanging lamp. Outside, the lake would shine silver beneath the clouds, and gulls would drift over the harbour. His grandfather rarely hurried. He believed that almost anything could be repaired if you first took the time to understand how it had been made. One rainy afternoon, while opening the wooden case of an old clock, his grandfather had told Elias about the valley. He described a place beyond the northern forest, where there were no engines, no bright streetlights, and no clocks. There was only the river, the trees, the hills, and a little house with a green door. "Who lives in the house?" Elias had asked. His grandfather smiled without looking up from the clock. "Someone who knows how to listen." "To what? To everything!" At the time, Elias had imagined a mysterious old traveller living there, perhaps with shelves of ancient books and maps of forgotten places. But when he asked more questions, his grandfather simply returned to his work. Years passed. Elias grew older. The repair shop closed, and the building became a small bakery. Elias moved to a busy city, where he worked in an office high above crowded streets. His days became filled with messages, meetings, schedules, and the constant sound of traffic below his apartment window. For a long time, he forgot about the valley. Then, on a warm afternoon in early September, a package arrived. It was waiting outside his apartment door when he came home from work. The package was wrapped in brown paper and tied with a thin piece of faded blue string. There was no return address. His name had been written across the front in careful, familiar handwriting. Elias carried it inside and placed it on the kitchen table. For several moments, he simply looked at it. He knew the handwriting. It belonged to his grandfather. That was impossible, of course. His grandfather had been gone for nearly 12 years. Elias untied the string and slowly unfolded the paper. Inside was a small wooden box. The box was made of dark walnut, polished smooth by age. On the lid was a simple carving of a pine tree beside a winding river. Elias remembered seeing it in the repair shop when he was young. It had always rested on the highest shelf, far beyond his reach. He opened the lid. Inside the box was a brass compass, a folded piece of paper, and a tiny silver key. The compass was heavier than it appeared. Its glass face was scratched, and the letters marking north, south, east, and west had nearly faded away. Elias lifted it from the box. The needle turned slowly. It moved past north. It trembled. Then it settled toward the upper corner of the apartment, pointing not north, but northeast. Beneath the compass was the folded paper. Elias opened it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map. A dark line marked the main highway leading north from the lake. A smaller line showed a country road, then a gravel road, then a narrow path disappearing into a forest. Beyond the forest was the outline of a valley. A river crossed the page in blue ink. Beside the river, his grandfather had drawn a small square with a green door. At the bottom of the map was a single sentence. When the noise becomes too loud, follow the quiet. Elias read the sentence twice. Outside his apartment, a truck sounded its horn. A siren moved through the streets below. Somewhere in the building, a door closed heavily. He looked again at the compass. The needle remained steady, northeast. That night, Elias placed the wooden box beside his bed. He expected the compass needle to change direction as he moved from room to room, but it did not. It always pointed toward the same distant place. He slept lightly. In his dreams, he heard water flowing over stones. The following morning was Saturday. Elias packed a small canvas bag with a sweater, a rain jacket, a bottle of water, and enough food for a day. He placed the compass, the silver key, and the folded map in the front pocket. By 7 o'clock, he was driving north. The city gradually disappeared behind him. Tall buildings gave way to smaller towns. The towns gave way to farms. The sky widened, and the mountains became clearer in the distance. By late morning, he reached the old wooden sign where the country lane left the highway. The sign had no name. It was weathered grey and leaned slightly toward the road, just as his grandfather had drawn it. Elias turned onto the lane. The road passed through open farmland. Cows rested beneath the shade of maple trees. Tall corn moved gently in the breeze. A hawk circled high above a golden field. After several miles, Elias passed the final farmhouse. A woman was watering flowers beside the porch. She looked up as he drove past and raised one hand in greeting. Elias waved back. Beyond the house, the pavement ended. His tires moved onto gravel with a steady, whispering sound. The road became narrower. Branches leaned close on either side, and sunlight appeared in shifting patches across the hood of the car. Soon there were no more houses. There were no fences, no signs, and no wires overhead. Only forest. Elias drove slowly. The gravel road turned to packed earth, exactly as it had on the map. Ferns grew along the edges, their green leaves trembling whenever the car passed. After another mile, the road ended beside an old wooden bridge. The bridge crossed a small stream, but several of its boards were missing. Moss covered the railings, and young trees had begun growing at the far end. Elias parked beneath a pine tree. The afternoon was warm, but the forest air felt cool when he stepped from the car. For the first time in many years, he found himself surrounded by complete silence. Not true silence. There was the soft movement of water beneath the bridge, the tapping of a woodpecker somewhere among the trees, the distant call of a bird, the faint rustle of wind moving through pine needles. But there were no machines, no voices, no notifications, no engines. Elias opened the front pocket of his bag and removed the compass. The needle pointed across the bridge. He followed. The missing boards forced him to step carefully, but the remaining wood was strong. On the far side, he found a narrow walking path almost hidden by fallen leaves. The path climbed gradually into the forest. At first, Elias checked the map every few minutes. The trail curved around a rocky hill, crossed the stream twice, and passed beneath a fallen birch tree. Everything matched the drawing. After half an hour, the trail divided. The left path continued uphill. The right path descended toward the sound of water. On the map, his grandfather had marked a small circle at the fork, but had not shown which direction to take. Elias studied the compass. The needle moved from one path to the other. Then it began turning slowly in a full circle. He waited. The needle did not settle. For the first time that day, uncertainty entered the journey. The afternoon light had begun to soften. The forest appeared deeper than it had before, with long shadows gathering between the trunks. Elias listened. From the right path came the clear sound of the stream. From the left came only the sighing of wind in the treetops. He remembered the sentence on the map. When the noise becomes too loud, follow the quiet. The right path was filled with rushing water. The left was quieter. Elias chose the left path. It climbed more steeply than he expected. The air grew cooler as he moved higher. Pine trees replaced the maples, and the ground became soft beneath a thick covering of needles. The path was faint but visible. Every so often, he found a small stack of stones placed beside a tree. The stones were smooth and pale, unlike the dark rocks of the surrounding hillside. Someone had marked the way. After another hour, Elias reached the top of the ridge. The forest ended suddenly. Before him was a narrow meadow filled with waist-high grass. Beyond the meadow rose another line of trees, their leaves glowing in the late afternoon light. Elias checked the map. The meadow was there. So was a symbol he had not noticed before. Near the center of the field, his grandfather had drawn a small star. Elias stepped into the grass. Grasshoppers moved away from his boots. Small white butterflies drifted among purple asters. The meadow smelled of warm earth, clover, and sun-dried leaves. At the center of the field stood an enormous oak tree. Its branches stretched outward like the roof of the great hall. The trunk was wider than Elias could reach around, and its bark was folded into deep ridges. At the base of the tree was a wooden bench. The bench faced west. Elias sat and lowered his bag to the ground. Through an opening in the trees, he could see the distant mountains. Their blue ridges faded one behind another beneath the pale sky. The sun had not yet reached the horizon, but the light had turned golden. Elias took a drink of water. For several minutes, he did nothing. He simply watched the meadow move. The grass leaned in one direction and then slowly returned. Leaves turned their lighter sides toward the wind. A pair of swallows crossed the field, flying low and fast before rising over the trees. On the bench beside him, someone had carved a few words. "You are closer than you think." Elias brushed his fingers across the letters. The carving was old. The edges had softened with time, and pale lichen grew in the deeper lines. Behind the bench, hidden beneath the low branches of the oak, Elias noticed another path. It entered the western trees and descended from the ridge. The compass needle had stopped spinning. It pointed toward the path. Elias stood. Before continuing, he looked once more across the meadow. A deep calm had begun to settle over the land. Even the wind seemed slower now. He followed the descending trail. The forest on the western side of the ridge was different. The trees grew farther apart, leaving wide spaces filled with ferns and moss. Sunlight reached the ground in long amber beams. The path wound gently downhill. It crossed a bed of dry leaves, moved around a cluster of granite boulders, and entered a grove of white birch trees. Their pale trunks reflected the evening light. Elias began to hear water again, not the sharp movement of a mountain stream, but a deeper, steadier sound, a river. The path continued downward. With each turn, the sound became clearer. Then the trees opened, and Elias stopped. The valley lay below him. It was wider than he had imagined. Green hills rose on both sides, their slopes covered with forest. Between them stretched a long meadow, glowing beneath the final light of day. A river moved through the center of the valley in broad silver curves. Near the river stood a small house. Its roof was dark grey. Smoke rose slowly from a stone chimney. And even at a distance, Elias could see that the front door was green. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. The valley was real. His grandfather had not invented it. The path led down the hillside in a series of gentle turns. As Elias descended, he noticed details that had been hidden from above. There was a garden behind the house. Rows of herbs and late summer vegetables grew behind a low wooden fence. Sunflowers stood near the back wall, their heavy heads bending toward the earth. A narrow footbridge crossed the river. Beyond the bridge, sheep grazed on the lower hillside. There was no road into the valley, no power line, no vehicle, only the house, the garden, the bridge, and a small wooden boat tied beside the riverbank. The sun touched the western hills. Its light spread across the meadow, turning every blade of grass warm and bright. Elias reached the bottom of the path. The river was close now. Its water moved smoothly around long islands of reeds. The current was gentle enough that he could see stones beneath the surface, grey, brown, white, and deep red. He walked toward the house. A stone path led through the garden gate. The air smelled of lavender, rosemary, and wood smoke. Before Elias could knock, the green door opened. A woman stood in the doorway. She appeared to be in her late 60s, although there was something ageless in the calm way she held herself. Her silver hair was tied loosely behind her head. She wore a blue sweater, dark trousers, and a pair of worn leather boots. She looked at Elias as though she had been expecting him. "You found the quiet path," she said. Her voice was soft but clear. Elias could think of no sensible response. He reached into his pocket and removed the compass. "My grandfather gave me this." The woman looked at it and smiled. "No," she said. "He returned it to you." Elias glanced at the wooden box inside his bag. "You knew him? Come inside," she replied. "The evening air will soon be cool." The room beyond the green door was warm and filled with lamplight. A fire burned gently in a stone fireplace. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams. Shelves covered one wall, holding books, jars, folded maps, and small objects collected from the natural world. There were feathers, smooth stones, pieces of driftwood, empty bird nests, shells, and pine cones. A round table stood near the window. 2 bowls of soup were already waiting. The woman closed the door. "My name is Mara," she said. "Elias, I know." She placed another log on the fire and gestured toward the table. "You have been walking for a long time." Elias sat. The soup was made with potatoes, leeks, carrots, and fresh herbs. Steam rose from the bowl. There was also warm bread, a small dish of butter, and a pitcher of cool water. For several minutes they ate without speaking. The quiet was not uncomfortable. It felt natural, like sitting beneath a tree or beside a lake. At last, Elias looked around the room. "Did my grandfather live here?" "For a while," Mara said. "When?" "Before you were born. And for a few weeks after you were born." Elias lowered his spoon. "He never told me. He did not need to. Some places are better discovered than explained." "Why did he leave?" Mara looked toward the window. Outside, the final sunlight had faded from the meadow. The river remained visible as a pale line beneath the growing dusk. "He had work to do elsewhere," she said. "People brought him broken things, and he helped make them whole again." Elias thought of the clocks, the chairs, the music boxes, and the rusted fishing reels. He repaired things. Yes, but that was not the only kind of repair he understood. Mara stood and carried her bowl to the counter. Elias followed with his own. On the counter was an old photograph in a simple wooden frame. It showed 2 young men and a woman standing beside the river. One of the men was Elias's grandfather. He appeared no older than 25. The other man was tall and thin, with a wide smile and a straw hat. The woman was Mara, much younger, but immediately recognizable. Behind them stood the same house with the green door. Elias picked up the photograph. "Who was the other man? My brother Daniel. Does he still live here?" Mara's expression remained peaceful, though a quiet sadness entered her eyes. "Not anymore. But he is part of the valley now, as all loved things eventually become part of the places that remember them." Elias returned the photograph to the counter. Mara lit a second lamp. The light filled the room with a warm amber glow. "You may stay tonight," she said. "There is a room upstairs. I should probably return before it gets too late. The forest path is difficult after dark." Elias looked through the window. The hills had become dark shapes against the sky. The first stars were appearing above them. He realized she was right. "I didn't bring much. You brought enough." Mara opened a small cabinet beside the fireplace and removed a folded blanket. "The valley provides very little," she said, "but it provides what is needed." After dinner, they stepped outside. Night had settled fully over the meadow. Without city lights, the sky appeared enormous. Thousands of stars stretched from one hill to the other. The Milky Way formed a pale river of light above the darker river below. Crickets sang in the grass. The air had cooled, carrying the scent of pine from the hills. Mara walked toward the river, and Elias followed. They crossed the stone path through the garden. At the riverbank, reeds moved softly in the current. Small insects circled above the water, flashing whenever they passed through the light from the house. Mara sat on a flat stone. Elias sat nearby. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The river moved steadily past. It did not hurry. It did not resist the stones in its path. It divided around them and joined itself again on the other side. Elias watched the reflected stars tremble on the surface. "What does the compass point toward?" he asked. Mara considered the question. "It points toward what you've been ignoring." "That sounds like something my grandfather would say." "He learned it here." Elias removed the compass from his pocket. In the starlight, the needle appeared black beneath the glass. It pointed toward the house. "Why does it point there now? Perhaps there is something inside that you have not yet noticed." "The silver key," Mara smiled. "You have been carrying it all day." "What does it open?" "That is for tomorrow." A breeze moved across the valley. The reeds leaned together, making a soft brushing sound. Somewhere downstream, a frog called once, then again. Mara stood. "It is time to rest." They returned to the house. The stairs were narrow and creaked gently beneath Elias's feet. At the top was a small hallway with 2 doors. Mara opened the first. The guest room had a low wooden ceiling and a single window overlooking the river. A bed stood beneath a quilt made from squares of blue, green, and grey cloth. On a small table beside the bed was a candle, a box of matches, and a ceramic cup filled with fresh water. There was no clock, no lamp, no telephone. Elias placed his bag on the floor. Mara gave him the folded blanket. "Sleep as long as you need," she said. "What time should I wake up?" "When you wake up." She closed the door. Elias changed into his sweater and lay beneath the quilt. The mattress was soft but supportive. The pillows smelled faintly of clean linen and lavender. Through the open window came the sound of the river. The current passed over stones with a low, continuous murmur. From time to time, leaves moved outside the window. The wooden house settled around him with quiet creaks. Elias expected to lie awake thinking about the compass, the key, his grandfather, and the strange journey into the valley. Instead, his thoughts began to slow. The sound of the river filled the spaces between them. One thought arrived, then passed. Another followed, then drifted away. His breathing became deeper. The quilt felt pleasantly heavy across his chest. The cool night air touched his face. Before he knew it, Elias was asleep. He dreamed of the repair shop beside the lake. His grandfather stood beneath the hanging lamp, working on a clock with tiny brass gears. But the clock had no hands. Its face was covered with a painting of a river. "You cannot repair time," his grandfather said. Elias was a child again, sitting on the high stool near the window. "Then why are you fixing the clock?" His grandfather smiled. "I am not fixing time. I am helping someone remember that it moves." Outside the shop window, the lake became the meadow became the valley filled with morning light. Elias opened his eyes. For several moments, he did not remember where he was. Soft daylight entered through the window. The river moved below, silver beneath a pale blue sky. A bird was singing from the roof. The room smelled of lavender and old pine wood. Elias stretched beneath the quilt. His body felt lighter than it had in months. There was no alarm demanding that he rise. No schedule waiting beside the bed. No screen glowing with new messages. He remained still and listened. The bird on the roof sang 3 clear notes. From the kitchen below came the gentle sound of a kettle being placed on a stove. Floorboards creaked, a cupboard opened and closed. The river continued beyond it all. Elias dressed and walked downstairs. Morning sunlight filled the kitchen. Mara stood near the counter, slicing apples into a bowl of oats. A pot of tea steamed beside her. "Good morning," she said. "What time is it?" Mara looked toward the window. "Morning." Elias smiled. It was not the answer he expected, but it was enough. They ate beside the open window. Breakfast was warm oatmeal with apples, honey, walnuts, and a little cinnamon. The tea was dark and fragrant. Outside, mist rested above the river. It moved slowly between the banks, revealing and hiding the water beneath. A deer stepped from the far edge of the meadow. It lowered its head to drink. Elias watched until it returned to the trees. After breakfast, Mara handed him a small woven basket. "We need mint, thyme, and chamomile from the garden." Elias followed her outside. The morning grass was cool with dew. Tiny drops of water shone on every leaf. The garden stood behind the house, enclosed by a fence made from uneven cedar branches. Mara opened the gate. Inside, narrow paths separated beds of herbs, vegetables, and flowers. Bees moved lazily among purple blossoms. Tomatoes hung heavily from their vines. Pumpkins rested beneath broad green leaves. Near the fence, sunflowers turned toward the east. Mara showed Elias how to gather the herbs without damaging the plants. "Take what is ready," she said, "and leave what is still growing." They began with mint. The leaves were cool and bright between Elias's fingers. Their clean scent remained on his hands after he placed them in the basket. Next came thyme, growing close to the earth in small tangled branches. The chamomile stood near the garden gate, covered with white flowers and yellow centers. They worked quietly. The sun rose above the eastern hill. Mist disappeared from the river. The valley became warmer, and the scent of the herbs deepened in the light. As Elias bent to gather chamomile, he noticed a small wooden door set into the hillside beyond the garden. It was almost hidden behind ferns. Unlike the front door of the house, this one was painted blue. A round silver lock was fixed at its center. Elias touched the key in his pocket. Mara noticed. "After the garden," she said. They carried the herbs into the kitchen. Mara spread the chamomile flowers across a screen near the window to dry. She tied the mint and thyme into small bundles and hung them from the ceiling. Then she filled a glass bottle with water and placed 2 pieces of bread, some cheese, and several apples into the basket. Together they walked toward the hillside. A narrow stone path passed through the ferns. The blue door was smaller than Elias had first thought. He had to bend slightly to reach the lock. Mara stood a few steps behind him. Elias removed the silver key. It entered the lock easily. He turned it. There was a soft click. The blue door opened inward. Beyond it was not a dark cellar, but a long stone passage illuminated by sunlight from somewhere ahead. The air smelled of cool earth. Elias looked back at Mara. "What is this place? A shorter path to the upper meadow. Why hide it behind a locked door?" "It is not hidden," Mara said. "It simply waits until someone has the key." They entered. The passage had been cut through the base of the hill. Its walls were smooth grey stone, and its floor was covered with fine sand. Water dripped slowly in the distance. Their footsteps made soft echoes. After several minutes, the passage began to rise. Daylight appeared ahead. They emerged on the other side of the hill into a meadow Elias had not seen from the ridge. It was smaller than the valley below and completely surrounded by forest. Wildflowers grew everywhere. Blue asters, yellow goldenrod, white yarrow, red clover, and tiny purple flowers that Elias could not name. In the center stood a circle of flat stones. Mara walked toward them. Elias followed. The stones formed the foundation of an old building. Only the lowest part of its walls remained. Grass had grown through the spaces, and small flowers covered the edges. "What used to be here?" Elias asked. "A shelter," Mara said, "long before the house was built below. For travellers, for anyone who found the valley." She sat on one of the flat stones and opened the basket. Elias sat across from her. From the upper meadow, he could see the tops of the hills and a wide stretch of sky. Clouds moved slowly from west to east, white at their edges and grey beneath. Mara divided the bread and cheese. "Your grandfather came here during a storm," she said. Elias looked at her. He was 23. He had left home without much of a plan and believed that travelling quickly was the same as travelling well. That sounds unlike him. He was not always the man you knew. Mara handed him an apple. He crossed the ridge during heavy rain. By the time he reached this meadow, he was cold, lost, and angry with the entire world. What happened? He found the shelter. Daniel and I were staying here that season. We gave him dry clothes, warm food, and a place beside the fire. And then? Then, the storm lasted 7 days. Elias imagined his grandfather as a restless young man, trapped in a stone shelter while rain covered the valley. He stayed here for a week? He stayed for almost a year? Mara looked across the wildflowers. This valley has a way of changing a person's plans. They ate in the sunlight. A cloud passed overhead, cooling the meadow for a moment. The breeze carried the warm scent of grass and clover. Elias felt no need to fill the quiet with questions. He watched a bee move from one flower to the next. It landed, gathered what it needed, and rose again. Nearby, the tall grass bent beneath the wind. Nothing in the meadow seemed concerned with how quickly the day was passing. After lunch, Mara lay back against the warm stone. Elias did the same. Clouds crossed the blue sky above them. Some were small and thin, dissolving almost as soon as they appeared. Others were broad and soft, like distant snow-covered hills. The earth beneath Elias felt solid and warm. The breeze touched his face. From the forest came the gentle tapping of branches. "You can close your eyes," Mara said. "I'm not tired. You do not have to be tired to rest." Elias closed his eyes. Without sight, the meadow became a landscape of sound. The wind moved across the grass from left to right. Bees hummed among the flowers. A bird called from the forest and was answered from the opposite hillside. Somewhere nearby, a grasshopper leaped from one stem to another. There was a quiet rhythm beneath everything. Not a rhythm made by a clock, a slower one. Leaves rising and falling, insects moving, cloud shadows travelling across the ground, breath entering and leaving the body. For a while, Elias listened without trying to understand. The sounds came closer, then moved away. The warm stones supported his back, his shoulders relaxed, his hands rested loosely at his sides. The sky continued above him whether he watched it or not. He began to understand what Mara meant when she spoke of listening. It was not searching for a message. It was not waiting for an answer. It was allowing the world to remain exactly as it was. After some time, Elias opened his eyes. The clouds had moved farther east. Mara was sitting nearby, weaving long pieces of grass into a small ring. "How long were my eyes closed?" "Long enough." They returned through the stone passage. Elias locked the blue door behind them and placed the key in his pocket. Back at the house, Mara prepared a jar of mint water and left it on the windowsill. Then she gave Elias a simple task. A stack of firewood beside the garden needed to be moved beneath the porch before the following week's rain. The work was easy and repetitive. Elias carried 2 pieces at a time. He placed them carefully beneath the porch roof, lining the cut ends toward the path. The wood smelled of cedar and maple. Some pieces were light and pale. Others were dark and heavy. As the stack grew, Elias found satisfaction in making each row stable. There was no need to hurry. No one measured how quickly he worked. When the basket beside the garden was empty, he returned to the larger pile and filled it again. Mara sat nearby, trimming dried lavender. The small purple flowers fell into a wooden bowl. The afternoon passed gently. Sunlight shifted across the side of the house. The sheep moved from one part of the hillside to another. A family of ducks appeared on the river, drifting downstream in a quiet line. Elias finished the woodpile and sat on the porch steps. Mara handed him a glass of mint water. The glass was cool in his hands. Tiny green leaves floated near the surface. He drank slowly. The water tasted clean and faintly sweet. "You look different," Mara said. "I've only been here one night." A single quiet night can reveal how tired a person has become. Elias watched the river. "I didn't think I was tired. Many people do not. They think they are impatient, unfocused, or unmotivated. Sometimes they are simply tired." A light breeze moved across the porch. The bundles of herbs hanging inside the doorway turned gently. Elias thought of his apartment, the office, the crowded elevator, and the endless movement of the city. Those things already felt farther away than the forest ridge. "What happens when I leave?" he asked. "The road will still be there. I mean, will I forget this place again?" "That depends on what you believe remembering means." Mara set the bowl of lavender beside her. "You may forget the exact shape of the hills. You may forget which flowers grew beside the garden gate. You may even forget the sound of the river during the night. Then what remains? The part of you that learned to become quiet." Late in the afternoon, Mara suggested they take the wooden boat upstream. The boat was narrow and painted dark green. Its oars had been worn smooth by years of use. Elias carried the basket while Mara untied the rope. They stepped carefully into the boat. The river was wider near the house, but its current remained gentle. Mara took one oar, Elias took the other. Together they pushed away from the bank. At first, Elias's movements were uneven. One oar entered the water before the other, turning the boat slightly sideways. Mara waited without correcting him. He tried again. This time, the oars entered together. The boat moved upstream. Each stroke made a quiet splash. Water gathered along the wooden blades and fell back into the river in shining drops. They passed the garden, the house, and the small footbridge. Upstream, the river curved beneath a line of willow trees. Their branches leaned low over the surface. Elias and Mara lifted the oars and allowed the boat to drift beneath them. Green leaves formed a curtain around the river. Sunlight filtered through in moving patterns. The air beneath the willows was cool. Dragonflies hovered near the reeds. Their wings flashed blue and silver. The river narrowed beyond the trees. They began rowing again. Smooth stones appeared beneath the clear water. Long strands of river grass moved with the current, bending downstream like green ribbons. Small fish gathered in the shadows of the boat and vanished whenever an oar entered the water. Elias began to find a natural rhythm. Reach forward, lower the oars, pull through the water, lift, return. The movement became easier each time. His breathing followed it. Forward, pull, lift, return. The boat continued upstream. Neither he nor Mara spoke. The river said enough. Water passed beneath the wooden hull with a soft, hollow sound. Birds moved through the branches. Leaves whispered against one another. The oar handles were warm beneath Elias's palms. Eventually, the river opened into a small lake. It rested between the hills like a sheet of polished glass. Tall pines grew along the shore, reflected so clearly that the trees seemed to continue downward into another sky. Near the center of the lake was a tiny island. Only 3 trees grew there, 2 pines and a white birch. Mara guided the boat toward it. A narrow strip of sand allowed them to step ashore. The island was no larger than a garden. Its center was covered with soft moss. Beneath the birch tree stood a weathered wooden chair. Elias smiled. "Who carried a chair all the way out here? Daniel." "Why?" he said. "Every island should have at least one comfortable place to sit." Elias tested the chair. It remained strong. He sat beneath the birch while Mara spread the blanket across the moss. From the island, the lake appeared perfectly still. Only occasional circles disturbed the surface when a fish rose or an insect touched the water. The hills surrounded them. Above the western ridge, the sun had begun its slow descent. Mara removed 2 small cups and the bottle of mint water from the basket. They drank in silence. A warm drowsiness settled over Elias. The journey upstream had relaxed his arms and shoulders. The moss beneath his feet felt cool and soft. On the far shore, a heron stood in the shallows. It remained completely still. Then, with one slow movement, it opened its wings and lifted above the water. Its reflection followed beneath it. Elias watched until both bird and reflection disappeared beyond the pines. Mara leaned back against one of the trees. This was your grandfather's favourite place in the valley. The island? The lake? Why? He liked things that reflected the sky. Elias looked at the water. Clouds floated across its surface. The reflected sky seemed deeper than the lake itself. What was Daniel's favourite place? The river during rain. And yours? Mara smiled. The kitchen early in the morning. That seems less dramatic. Not everything important needs to be dramatic. The sun moved closer to the ridge. The air remained warm, but the light softened. Elias let his eyes close. He could hear the quiet contact of water against the sand. A small wave arrived, then another. Each one moved no farther than the last. The sound repeated gently. Water meeting shore, water returning, water meeting shore, water returning. His mind followed the rhythm. Thoughts appeared less often now. When one came, it did not remain for long. He thought of the office. A small wave touched the sand. The thought faded. He thought of the package outside his apartment. Another wave came and returned. The thought dissolved. He thought of his grandfather beneath the hanging lamp. The image stayed a little longer, but it no longer carried the sharpness of grief. Instead, it felt warm, like lamplight on a rainy afternoon, like cedar shavings on the floor, like a clock opened carefully on a wooden table. Elias breathed in. The lake air smelled of pine, water, and sun-warmed moss. He breathed out. His body became heavier in the chair. His feet rested against the soft earth. His hands lay open on his knees. The island held him without asking anything in return. When he opened his eyes again, the sun was touching the ridge. The sky above it had turned pale gold. Mara was standing near the boat. "We should begin drifting home." They pushed the boat from the sand and stepped inside. This time they did not row. The river's gentle current carried them downstream. Elias rested the oars across the boat. The island slowly became smaller behind them. The lake narrowed into the river. They passed between the willows once again. Evening light shone through the hanging branches. Leaves brushed softly against the side of the boat. A few fell onto the water and travelled beside them. One yellow leaf circled near the bow. It moved forward, slowed, then followed the current around a stone. Elias watched it travel. The leaf did not choose its destination. It did not need to know every turn of the river. It simply rested on the surface and allowed the water to carry it. The house appeared beyond the footbridge. Smoke rose from the chimney. The windows reflected the amber sky. Mara guided the boat toward the bank and secured the rope. They walked through the garden. The evening air had cooled the herbs, releasing their fragrance beneath their footsteps. Inside, Mara lit the lamps. Elias added 2 pieces of wood to the fire. They prepared dinner together. Mara washed potatoes while Elias cut carrots and onions. They placed everything in a heavy iron pot with herbs, beans, and vegetable broth. The meal cooked slowly above the stove. While they waited, Mara showed Elias how to shape bread dough. The dough was soft and slightly warm. He pressed it forward with the heels of his hands, folded it, turned it, and repeated the movement. Press, fold, turn, press, fold, turn. The rhythm reminded him of rowing. Mara dusted a wooden board with flour. They divided the dough into 2 round loaves and placed them near the stove to rise. As the soup cooked, the kitchen filled with the scent of thyme, onions, bread, and wood smoke. Outside, the sky deepened from gold to blue. The first evening star appeared above the eastern hill. Elias set bowls on the table. Mara placed a candle between them. The simple flame moved whenever air entered through the open window. They ate slowly. The bread was warm and crisp on the outside, soft within. The soup had absorbed the flavors of the garden. Each spoonful felt nourishing and calm. After dinner, rain began. At first, only a few drops touched the roof. Then the sound grew steadier. The rain crossed the valley from west to east, dimming the final light and covering the river with thousands of small circles. Marat closed the kitchen window but left the upper part open. Cool, rain-scented air entered the room. They moved their chairs closer to the fireplace. Elias wrapped the blue-grey blanket around his shoulders. Marat brought 2 cups of chamomile tea. The rain continued across the roof. It tapped gently against the windows. It fell into the garden, darkening the paths and washing dust from the leaves. Water gathered along the roof and descended through a copper chain beside the porch. Elias watched the fire. Flames moved slowly around the cedar logs. The outer bark darkened. Small sparks rose and disappeared. "Did my grandfather ever return after he left?" Elias asked. "Several times. Why didn't he bring me? He believed you should choose the valley yourself." "I didn't really choose it. The compass led me here. You chose to follow." Elias held the warm cup between his hands. "Did he send the package?" Mara looked into the fire. "He prepared it many years ago. Who delivered it? A friend. Why now? That is a question only you can answer." The rain became softer. Its sound blended with the river outside. Elias considered the months before the package arrived. He had been sleeping poorly. Meals had become something he ate while reading messages. He had stopped visiting the lake near his apartment because he always believed he was too busy. Even on weekends, he carried the feeling that he was behind. Behind what, he could not say. There was always somewhere else he should be, something else he should be doing. The package had arrived on the first evening in years when he had come home without turning on the television, music, or radio. Perhaps that was why he had noticed the rain tapping against his kitchen window. Perhaps, for only a moment, he had become quiet enough for the valley to find him. Mara placed another log on the fire. "You do not need to understand everything tonight," she said. "I know. Understanding is another kind of work. Rest first." They listened to the rain. Minutes passed. Or perhaps an hour. Without clocks, Elias could not be certain, and the uncertainty felt pleasant. The fire warmed the room. The tea warmed his hands. The blanket rested across his shoulders. Rain moved over the roof in long, gentle waves. Sometimes it became louder. Sometimes it softened until only the dripping from the eaves remained. The house seemed to breathe with the storm. Wood expanded quietly near the fire. Floorboards answered the wind. The chimney gave a low and distant hum. Nothing needed to be repaired. Nothing needed to be improved. The old house was allowed to creak. The fire was allowed to fade. The rain was allowed to fall without anyone measuring how much had arrived. Elias leaned back in the chair. His eyes grew heavy. The edges of the room softened in the lamplight. Mara opened a book, but did not begin reading. She seemed content simply to hold it. Elias watched the flames move lower. One log settled into the embers. A brief shower of sparks rose. Then the fire became steady again. His breathing slowed. The rain continued. It fell on the roof, on the garden, on the meadow, on the river and the hills. It fell upon the path through the forest, upon the oak tree and the empty bench, upon the wildflowers of the upper meadow, upon the lake and the little island with its 3 trees. All across the valley, the rain touched each leaf and stone. It gathered in small hollows. It ran down bark. It rested in the cups of flowers. It followed the slope of the land toward the river, and the river carried it onward without hurry. Elias allowed his eyes to close. For a while, he remained aware of the fire's warmth on his face. He heard Mara turn a page. He heard the rain against the glass. Then those sounds seemed to move farther away. When Elias opened his eyes, the fire had become red embers. Mara was placing the book on the table. "Bid," she said gently. Upstairs, the room felt cooler than the kitchen. The rain was clearer beneath the sloping roof. Elias opened the window a little wider. Fresh air entered, carrying the scent of wet leaves and dark earth. He lay beneath the quilt. The mattress received his weight. The pillow supported his head. Rain moved over the roof directly above him. Each drop was small. Together they became a soft and endless sound. He listened to it without counting. Some drops arrived close together. Others were separated by a moment of silence. Water travelled through the gutter. It descended beside the house. It entered the garden soil. The river continued below the window. Fuller now, but still calm. Elias imagined the current moving in the darkness, passing stones, passing reeds, passing beneath the footbridge, travelling around the bend and through the willow trees, entering the lake, touching the shore of the little island. Moving onward, his thoughts began to travel in the same way. They came, they passed, they did not need to stop. A memory of the city appeared. It moved downstream. A question about the compass arrived. It passed beneath the bridge. A thought about tomorrow entered the lake and disappeared into reflected stars. Elias breathed slowly. The rain breathed with him. A soft rush across the roof as he breathed in. A quiet dripping from the eaves as he breathed out. In. The roof receiving the rain. Out. The earth receiving the water. In. Cool air beside the window. Out. Warmth beneath the quilt. His hands became still. His jaw relaxed. The muscles around his eyes softened. His feet rested heavily beneath the covers. The day released him. He slept. Morning arrived gradually. The rain had ended some time before dawn. Drops still fell from the roof, one at a time. The sky outside the window was pale grey. Mist covered the valley. Only the nearest part of the river was visible. Elias remained beneath the quilt and watched the mist move. It curled around the reeds. It drifted across the garden. It hid the hills and revealed them again. The world appeared unfinished, as though someone was slowly painting it into existence. A thin line of sunlight touched the upper clouds. Their edges brightened. The grey sky became silver. Then, beyond the eastern hill, the sun rose. Light spread through the mist. The river appeared first, then the garden fence, then the meadow. Drops of water shone on every branch. The entire valley glittered. Elias dressed and walked downstairs. Mara had opened the kitchen door. Fresh morning air filled the room. She was preparing tea and placing bread from the night before into a pan above the stove. "Today the hills will be clear," she said. "Are we going somewhere, if you would like?" "Where?" "To the old cedar grove." After breakfast, they crossed the footbridge. The river had risen slightly from the rain, but the water remained clear. On the far side, the sheep grazed among wet grass. They watched Elias and Mara pass, then returned to eating. A trail climbed the southern hill. The wet earth was dark and soft beneath their boots. Sunlight passed between the clouds. Where it touched the ground, steam rose gently from the leaves. They entered the forest. The air beneath the trees smelled rich and clean. Water drops fell from high branches. Some struck leaves on the way down, making a sequence of delicate taps. Others landed in the moss without a sound. Mara walked slowly. She sometimes stopped to move a fallen branch from the path or examine a mushroom growing beside a tree. Elias noticed that she never seemed to be travelling, only toward a destination. The path itself received her full attention. They passed beneath hemlock trees and around granite ledges covered in fern. A small stream crossed the trail. Rainwater moved over the stones, clear and cold. Mara stepped across. Elias followed. Higher on the hillside, the trees changed. The maples and pines grew fewer. The air became filled with the scent of cedar. The old grove appeared beyond a low ridge. The trees were enormous. Their trunks rose straight from the earth, red-brown and deeply textured. Their upper branches formed a green roof high above the forest floor. Very little undergrowth grew beneath them. The ground was covered with soft needles, fallen bark, and patches of deep green moss. Sunlight entered in narrow beams. The grove felt still. Even the wind seemed to move above it rather than through it. Mara stopped beside the first tree. "This is where we gather wood after storms," she said. "Only what the trees have already released." She showed Elias several cedar branches that had fallen during the night. They collected the smaller pieces and tied them into bundles. The work produced almost no sound. A branch lifted. A cord tightened. A bundle rested beside the trail. Far above, wind moved through the cedar tops with a low, rushing whisper. The sound resembled distant ocean waves. Elias sat against one of the trunks. The bark was cool and firm behind him. Mara continued gathering branches farther into the grove. He watched a beam of sunlight move across the forest floor. Tiny particles floated within it, dust, pollen, drops of moisture. They rose and fell so slowly that they seemed almost still. Elias rested his hands on the earth. The ground was soft beneath the cedar needles. He could feel the great tree behind him. Its roots entered the soil beneath his body. They spread outward through darkness, holding the hillside, gathering water, joining stone and earth. Above him, the trunk rose toward the light. For more years than Elias could imagine, this cedar had stood through every season. Spring rain, summer heat, autumn wind, winter snow. It had not remained unchanged. Branches had broken, bark had fallen, storms had bent its upper limbs. Yet the tree continued, not by resisting every change, but by growing with them. Elias looked upward. He could not see the highest branches. They disappeared into green shadow. His breath entered slowly. The scent of cedar filled his chest. He released it. His shoulders lowered. The grove offered no questions. It required no explanation. There was only the tree behind him, the earth beneath him, and the distant movement of wind above. He closed his eyes. The cedar supported his back. The ground supported his legs. His hands rested beside him. He listened to the high branches. The sound rose, then softened. Rose, then softened, like waves approaching a shore beyond the hills. A tiny drop of water landed on a leaf. Another fell somewhere farther away. A bird moved briefly through the canopy and became still. The forest returned to quiet. Elias's thoughts became fewer. There was nothing to solve within the grove, nothing to plan, no correct way to sit beneath an old cedar tree. He allowed his breathing to find its own rhythm. Air came in, air went out, the tree remained, the earth remained. The light moved slowly across the ground. When Mara returned, she carried a bundle of branches beneath one arm. She sat nearby without speaking. Together, they rested beneath the cedars. The morning continued around them. Eventually, sunlight reached deeper into the grove. The beams became warmer and brighter. The damp cedar needles released more of their fragrance. Elias opened his eyes. Mara was watching a spider repair a web between two low branches. One silver strand at a time, the spider moved around the broken section. It did not rebuild the entire web. It repaired only what the storm had changed. Elias watched until the spider stopped in the center. The thin threads became visible whenever sunlight touched them. They carried tiny drops of rain. Each drop reflected the forest. "Your grandfather loved this grove too," Mara said. "Did he have many favorite places?" He learned that choosing one favorite place was unnecessary. They carried the cedar bundles back down the hill. The sun had dried much of the path. Birds sang from the newly bright branches. The stream crossed the trail with a softer voice now that the rainwater had begun to pass. At the meadow, the sheep rested in the sun. One lay near the path with its eyes half closed. Another stood beside the river, drinking. The house waited beyond the bridge, its green door open. They placed the cedar beneath the porch. Mara chose one small branch and carried it inside. She placed it on the fire. Soon the kitchen filled with a warm, clean fragrance. The rest of the day passed without adventure. And this, Elias began to understand, was one of the valley's greatest gifts. Not every day needed a discovery, not every hour needed a purpose. They washed clothes in a wooden basin and hung them on a line beside the garden, white sheets filled with wind. They rose and settled like slow sails. Elias repaired a loose board in the garden fence using tools from a small shed. The hammer felt familiar in his hand. He thought of the repair shop, but the memory remained gentle. Mara gathered beans and tomatoes. They placed the vegetables in baskets on the porch. Around noon, they ate beneath the oak tree near the river. Bread, tomatoes, cheese, fresh basil, cool water. Afterward, Mara returned to the garden. Elias remained beneath the tree. The grass was dry and warm. He lay on his back with one arm beneath his head. Branches moved overhead. Between the leaves, the sky was clear blue. The river passed nearby. Its current had lowered after the rain, revealing stones along the bank. A dragonfly landed on a blade of grass beside him. Its transparent wings rested open. For a moment, it remained perfectly still. Then it rose and disappeared over the water. Elias watched the leaves. Some were dark green. Others became almost golden when sunlight passed through them. The wind turned them. Light changed. Shadows moved across his sweater. His eyes became heavy. He did not resist. The earth beneath him was warm. The tree cast a cool shadow over his face. The river continued speaking softly beside the roots. He closed his eyes. The afternoon settled around him. Bees moved through clover. Grass leaned beneath the breeze. A bird sang once from the opposite bank. The sound of Mara working in the garden was distant and peaceful. A basket placed on the ground, a gate opening, leaves being gathered. Then quiet again. Elias drifted at the edge of sleep. He did not know whether he was awake or dreaming when he heard his grandfather's voice. "You found it." Elias opened his eyes. For a moment, he expected to see the repair shop. Instead, green leaves moved above him. The river shone through the grass. No one stood nearby. Yet Elias did not feel disappointed. He placed one hand on the ground. The valley was not a message his grandfather had left behind. It was not a puzzle to solve or a secret to possess. It was simply a place where the lessons of his grandfather remained alive. Move carefully. Listen before acting. Repair what can be repaired. Rest when rest is needed. Allow time to move. Elias closed his eyes again. The tree held its shadow over him. The river continued. He slept deeply for a while. When he woke, the sunlight had moved to the other side of the trunk. Mara was sitting nearby with 2 cups of tea. "Good nap?" she asked. "I think so." "You think? I'm not sure how long I was asleep." "Then it was a very good nap." They drank tea beneath the tree. The afternoon was beginning to cool. Clouds gathered above the western hills, but they were thin and high. No more rain was coming. Elias watched the river. "I should return tomorrow," he said. Mara nodded. She did not ask why. "I have work on Monday. Then tomorrow is a good day to leave. I don't feel ready." Few departures wait for readiness. Elias looked toward the house. "Will I be able to find the valley again? The path will not move. The compass, you may keep it. And the key? The key belongs to anyone who may need the upper meadow." Elias held the warm cup in both hands. "What should I do when I return to the city?" Mara looked at the river. "Nothing dramatic. That's not very helpful. It is the most helpful answer I know." She turned toward him. "Open a window when it rains. Eat one meal without reading anything. Walk somewhere without trying to arrive quickly. Keep something near your bed that reminds you of the river. That's all. Small, quiet things are stronger than they appear." The evening arrived slowly. They brought the dry sheets in from the line and folded them at the kitchen table. They gathered vegetables for dinner. Elias carried water from the pump beside the garden. Mara prepared another loaf of bread for his journey. As the sun lowered, the valley turned golden once more. The hills cast long shadows across the meadow. The sheep gathered near the lower slope. Birds moved toward the trees. The air became still. After dinner, Elias and Mara walked to the footbridge. They stood at its center and watched the river pass below. The water reflected the evening sky. Gold became rose. Rose became violet. The first stars appeared. Elias rested his hands on the wooden railing. The bridge was weathered but strong. Beneath it, the river moved through alternating bands of light and shadow. "Why did you stay here?" he asked. Mara considered. At first, because Daniel stayed. Later, because the garden needed care. Then because travellers occasionally arrived. And now? Now I stay because this is where my life is. Do you ever feel alone? Sometimes. She looked across the meadow. Loneliness is part of the weather. It arrives. It remains for a while. It passes. They continued across the bridge and walked along the opposite bank. The grass was soft beneath their steps. Small moths appeared above the wildflowers. Their pale wings reflected the final light. At a bend in the river, Mara stopped beside a willow tree. Its branches formed a sheltered space near the water. Beneath it was another bench. Elias sat. The willow leaves moved around them like a curtain. The river was close enough that he could reach down and touch it. He lowered his fingers into the water. It was cool. The current passed around his hand. He lifted it. Drops fell from his fingertips and returned to the river. Mara sat at the other end of the bench. They watched the sky darken. No words were necessary. The valley was preparing for night. Birdsong became less frequent. Crickets began among the grass. A frog called from the reeds. The wind left the hills and moved gently along the river. One by one, stars appeared above the willow branches. Elias breathed in the cool air. He allowed the day to settle. The cedar grove, the shining meadow after rain, the warm bread, the garden fence, the afternoon beneath the oak. Each memory found a quiet place within him. Nothing needed to be held too tightly. The moments had already happened. They could now drift like leaves on the river. The sky became darker. The water carried the reflection of stars. Elias felt the familiar heaviness of sleep approaching, though he was still sitting outside. His arms relaxed, his legs rested comfortably. The willow leaves whispered overhead. A long breath entered, a longer breath left. Mara remained beside him, still and quiet. For a while, Elias imagined that the bench, the tree, and the river were all breathing together. The branches lifted, the water passed, the grass leaned, the night expanded. They returned to the house beneath starlight. The lamps inside were low. Mara gave Elias a small object wrapped in cloth. He opened it. Inside was a smooth river stone. It was oval, grey, and crossed by a thin white line. "For beside your bed," she said. Elias closed his hand around it. "Thank you." Upstairs, he placed the stone on the small table beside the candle. The window remained open. The night was clear, and the river was gentle after the previous day's rain. Elias lay beneath the quilt for the final time. He looked at the room carefully. The sloping wooden roof, the pale curtains, the water cup, the blue and green squares of the quilt. He wanted to remember everything. Then he understood that trying too hard to remember would keep him awake, so he let the room become soft around him. The details faded naturally in the darkness. The river remained. He placed one hand near the stone beside the bed. Its presence was enough. Tomorrow he would cross the meadow, climb the forest trail, pass the oak tree on the ridge, cross the old bridge, return to the car. The journey waited beyond the morning. It did not need to begin tonight. Tonight belonged to rest. Tonight, the city was distant. The office was distant. Monday was distant. Only the valley was near. Only the room. Only the quilt. Only the cool air and the low movement of water. Elias breathed slowly. The river passed beneath the stars. It moved around stones without struggle. It carried fallen leaves without asking where they wished to go. It received water from every small stream. It continued through darkness. Elias allowed his thoughts to enter the current. One by one, they floated away. The question of when he would return, the thought of unread messages, the fear of forgetting. Each one became lighter. Each one rested on the water. Each one moved downstream. He did not follow them. He remained in the warm bed, the mattress beneath him, the pillow beneath his head, the quilt over his body. His breathing became the only movement he needed. In, cool night air. Out, warm, quiet rest. In, the scent of pine and river water. Out, the remaining weight of the day. In, the valley around him. Out, nothing to carry. His eyes rested. His forehead became smooth. His shoulders sank deeper. His fingers loosened. His legs grew heavy and warm. Outside, the river continued its patient journey. The sound became softer, then softer still. Elias slept. At dawn, Mara prepared breakfast and packed bread, apples, and cheese into Elias's canvas bag. They ate together without speaking much. The morning was clear. A thin mist moved above the meadow, but did not hide the hills. After breakfast, Elias carried his bag to the green door. The compass rested in his pocket. The silver key hung on a hook beside the fireplace. The river stone was wrapped carefully inside his sweater. Mara stood on the porch. "Follow the same trail to the ridge," she said. "The path will be easy in this light." Elias looked across the garden. "I don't know how to thank you. You listened. That doesn't seem like enough." "It is." He stepped from the porch, then turned back. "Will another traveler come? Eventually." "How will they find the valley? The same way you did?" "When the noise becomes too loud." Mara smiled. "They will follow the quiet." Elias walked toward the river. He crossed the garden path, past the sunflowers, and reached the footbridge. At its center, he stopped. The house stood behind him. Morning sunlight touched the roof. Smoke rose from the chimney. Mara remained on the porch beside the green door. Elias raised one hand. She raised hers. Then he continued across. The trail climbed from the meadow into the western forest. Elias moved slowly. He no longer checked the compass. The path was clear. Birch trees shone in the morning light. Ferns opened beside the stones. Birds moved through the branches above. At the top of the ridge, Elias entered the wide meadow. The grass was still wet with dew. The oak tree stood at its center. He walked to the bench and sat. The western mountains were blue beneath the clear sky. Behind him, hidden beyond the forest, the valley continued. The carved words remained beside him. "You are closer than you think." Elias rested his hand on the old wood. He understood now that the message did not refer only to the valley. The quiet he had travelled so far to find was not something that belonged entirely to the river or the hills. Part of it had always been within him. It had simply been covered by noise. He stood and followed the eastern path. The forest received him. He descended through pine needles and maple leaves, past the stone markers and the fork beside the stream. This time, the compass remained in his pocket. He knew the direction. At the old bridge, he crossed carefully over the missing boards. His car waited beneath the pine tree, exactly where he had left it. A few yellow leaves rested on the windshield. Elias placed his bag on the passenger seat. Before starting the engine, he sat with both hands on the steering wheel. The forest surrounded the car. Water passed beneath the bridge. A woodpecker tapped far away. Wind moved through the pine needles. Elias listened until he felt ready. Then he started the car. The engine seemed loud at first. He drove slowly along the earth road. The forest opened gradually. Packed earth became gravel. Gravel became pavement. The first telephone wire appeared overhead, then a mailbox, then a farmhouse. The woman he had seen on his journey north was standing in the garden again. This time, she was gathering flowers into a basket. She looked up as Elias passed. They waved to one another. The highway. Elias turned south. The mountains remained in the mirror for many miles. Eventually, towns appeared. Traffic increased. The sky narrowed between buildings. By evening, Elias reached his apartment. He carried the canvas bag upstairs. Inside, everything was as he had left it. The kitchen table, the closed windows, the silent television, the small pile of unopened mail. He placed the river stone beside his bed. Then he opened the kitchen window. City air entered. It carried distant traffic, voices from the sidewalk, and the smell of rain rising from warm pavement. The city was not the valley. It would never become the valley. But beneath its louder sounds, quieter ones remained. A pigeon settling on a nearby roof, leaves moving in a courtyard, water travelling through a drain, a breeze touching the curtains. Elias prepared a simple meal. He ate at the table without reading or watching anything. Afterward, he washed the plate slowly and placed it beside the sink. Night settled over the buildings. Windows began to shine across the street. Elias turned off the bright overhead lights and switched on a small lamp. The room softened. Before bed, he opened the wooden box once more. The hand-drawn map remained inside. He unfolded it. The road, the forest, the ridge, the valley, the river, the house with the green door. At the bottom, his grandfather's words remained. When the noise becomes too loud, follow the quiet. Elias folded the map and returned it to the box. He placed the compass beside the river stone. The needle moved slowly beneath the scratched glass. It turned northeast, toward the valley. Then it trembled. For a moment it pointed toward the open window, then toward the kitchen table, then toward the bed. Finally the needle became still. It pointed directly at Elias. He smiled. Outside, light rain began to fall. Drops touched the window ledge. They tapped against the glass. They gathered along the roof. Elias lay down and closed his eyes. He imagined the rain crossing the northern hills, falling among cedar branches, touching the upper meadow, sliding from the leaves of the oak tree, darkening the green door of Mara's house, entering the river. He imagined the river receiving every drop, moving beneath the footbridge, passing the willow bench, travelling through the lake around the little island, continuing onward beneath the night. The sound of rain filled the apartment. The city became distant. Elias placed one hand around the smooth river stone. Its surface was cool at first. Then it warmed beneath his fingers. He breathed in. He breathed out. The road to the valley remained. The house remained. The garden grew beneath the rain. The cedar tree stood quietly on the hill. The river moved without hurry. And somewhere beyond the pines, beneath a wide and peaceful sky, a green door waited for the next traveller who remembered how to follow the quiet.